Dear boy, appreciate you coming back here today to
Thank you.
share some of your expertise with us. You are for people who haven't met you before, you're a realtor in Maple Ridge, British Columbia.
Yes, realtor
And
for about 10 years with Remax.
And today is April 6, 2023. We'll get to the market conditions in your area and other areas shortly, but you're going to treat us to a little exposition about building inspectors or home inspectors.
Home inspectors.
Tell us the difference. I think one's municipal and one's in the employ of the individual.
Yes. I deal with a lot of, I deal with both as a realtor, but the difference is a building inspector typically will work for the city.
Right.
They're the ones that come out to make sure buildings are up to code.
Right.
And they'll issue occupancy permits and know, the government stuff. Home inspectors are more for the individual buyers and sellers for their specific property, and their function is essentially to give a general overview of a property, the condition of it, the livability of it, any maintenance issues for the buyers, sellers to consider. So I deal with both.
Okay. The home inspector, what are the range of topics that they'll typically cover off?
So that's a good question. A lot of people think like the home inspector does everything.
Yes.
But it's one of those things where like they're a generalist. They're not a carpenter, they're not an electrician, they're not a plumber. They don't have certificates for all those things, but they are trained in enough of that to give context to buyers and sellers about what they should look for. So they can say, okay, you may want to look at the electrical stuff. It's using old wires, and so it might not be up to code. So that would be prudent for a buyer to bring in an electrician to look at more. Other things they'll consider is general wear and tear, maintenance costs. So if say the roof is 20 years old, it's going to be replaced soon, some cost to consider. So when buyers are considering a purchase of a property and they have a home inspection condition, that condition is for them to basically do their due diligence.
Yes.
To make sure that they're satisfied that they're okay with the condition of the property or the anticipated costs of renovating or fixing the property. Home inspectors are advisors to that process.
Is there ever a reason not to get a home inspector?
That's a good question. I would say I would always advise for the buyer to consider it.
Yeah,
right?
I would think so.
Because especially as a buyer agent, we have to make sure the buyers have all the information or have been given an opportunity to look at all the information before they actually put the money down and commit to the property. Sometimes you have market conditions that kind of put pressure on buyers to not have a home inspection condition, to be frank, because if there's multiple offers, generally like a seller doesn't care about buyer's inspections.
Yes.
That's only for the buyer's benefit.
Of course.
So from a seller's point of view, if they see an offer without a home inspection, that would look better for them. So sometimes you'll see buyers do an offer without a home inspection. That being said, if I am in a market like that and I have a buyer like that, I would still say to the buyer, do the home inspection before you make an offer. So you still have the benefit of that.
Right. Do you see on this agreement of purchase and sale a subject to home inspection coming up?
It's not a standard thing that has to be put in there, but it is a standard thing that as a realtor we have to advise our clients to consider putting that as a condition.
Right. Well, typically the home inspection would come before the offer comes in.
No, not always. It's a question of money, right? Because you got to pay the home inspector whether you buy the house or not. So in, say, normal market conditions where you're the only offer,
right,
the buyer will get the offer accepted first,
right,
and then have the home inspection as one of the conditions during the subject period.
Right.
But even then, that's usually left to the end, because usually the big one, of course, is financing.
Yes.
They want to make sure they got the financing approved before they actually are willing to spend, say, $500 on an inspection.
Right.
But like I said earlier, if it's a hot market and there's going to be multiple offers and you want to make your offer look as attractive as possible,
Yes.
but still have the protection and
Yes.
security of a home inspection, yeah, I would say get the home inspection done before you make an offer,
Yes.
right? And usually listing agents will have to accommodate to that.
Do you have any comments about areas of a typical residential home that tend to be spotted as problem areas by the home inspectors, like foundations or?
Yeah, well, they're generally supposed to cover a few basic areas like electrical, plumbing, foundation, and any kind of they call it latent defects,
Right.
Right, things that are not obvious but
Right.
are still a defect.
Yeah.
So they would, with the electrical thing, a common thing would be like old wires,
Right.
or there's not enough power to what the property needs.
Yes.
So that could be a risk of a fire. Insurance might not cover it. With plumbing issues, a big issue is like the piping. How old is the piping? If it's like townhouses, moisture, like in the attics, and mold, that's a very common issue. Foundations is another big one. Like you'll see that more with older houses, like older meaning, let's say over 50 years.
Yeah.
If the foundation is settled, there could be cracks, and it's not really fixable. Like you can't really
Right.
just pick up the house and put a new foundation. So the inspectors have to just note those things,
Yes.
and they can give some advice as to what should be done, how much it might cost,
Mm.
but they're not the actual ones that like you can specifically hold liable for that, right? You'd have to
Right.
get other professionals.
Mm. In your recent experience in your area where you work, what percentage of buyers will actually bring in a home inspector?
Almost all of them. I'd say at least 90% will do it.
Yeah.
There are cases like if you know the property already, like
Yes.
somehow like if it's a strata, it's like really well maintained. You
Yes.
see the records and see the finances. That's a rare case. Most of the time, they'll still put a condition for a home inspection, and from that, I would add, I'd say probably about 20% of the time, the buyer will back out
Yes.
because of something objective they saw in the
Yes.
home inspection, like there's a leak in the roof, like,
Right.
or a subjective feeling, like they see some problems and they're like, yeah, I don't really want to deal with that problem, so
Right.
they'll walk away from it. So that gives them an opportunity to walk away from a financial headache, right?
For sure.
Put that $500 or whatever the cost is to be sure, like kind of getting what they call it, your car inspected before you buy it, like
Right.
a used car, right?
Do you keep up with what the prices are for these home inspectors in terms of a range
Yeah.
of possibilities?
I mean, it's one of those things, like there's a lot of home inspectors on the market, and it has kind of become a commodity in a way. So
Right.
there's a sort of commodity price, like where, a typical condo or townhouse might be $400 to $500.
Yeah.
A detached might be $600.
Yes.
It doesn't go too much outside that range.
Yes.
But personally, what I look for is like quality inspectors who
Right.
who can actually serve the client, like to give them honest advice, not freak them out. Also, like because every home is going to have some issue.
Sure.
Right? So even a brand new home, they can find something. So the kind of inspector who can educate the customer.
Right.
Right. A big part, not just like the financial costs, maintenance things, but as it relates to like my work, like the health part of it.
Right.
I'm a healthy home realtor, so I
Yes.
want to make sure buyers are buying a healthy home.
Yes.
So there's a couple inspectors that I like working with more because they incorporate that more into their
Right.
practice.
Yeah.
So they can actually give advice. I had a recent case where a buyer was looking to buy a detached home.
Right.
It's an older house out in Chilliwack, actually, and there was a number of issues with the house, like mold, some asbestos. The foundation wasn't secure, like it wasn't covered, so there was like potentially fumes like coming up from the ground, like radon or something.
Wow.
So the inspector just straight up said to the client in front of me, "This is not a healthy home.
Huh.
You will not be able to be healthy in this home." But he also said, "I can't write that down
Yes.
in the actual report
Yes.
because of some liability and insurance reasons.
Oh.
But because he had that integrity
Yes.
to say, because he knows he's been doing this for 30 years and he's a health conscious guy himself.
Right.
That's why I like working with him.
Huh.
It's actually quite interesting, like, you know, from the legal point of view, like
Yes.
it's interesting, like where home inspectors, what are they covered for, like insurance and
Right.
liability, stuff like that. Like for example, stories about, you know, gas leaks or mold. Those are
Right.
good examples. A home inspector will have a tool that
Yes.
can measure gas levels in the air.
Yeah.
How much carbon monoxide or nitrogen dioxide, those kind of things that come from gas fireplaces or gas stoves. They can say, okay, they have a tool that says there's too much of this gas in the air. It's not healthy. But they can't say in the report that there's too much gas
Right.
and put it that it's unsafe
Right.
because they're not certified gas technicians.
Yeah.
Right? Or mold. Like you can see the mold, right?
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
just, okay, like there's moisture and you can just kind of use your common sense and see.
For sure.
But they can't say it's actually mold unless they take a sample, someone takes a sample, goes to a lab, and is verified as mold,
Right.
right? So, not all home inspectors will mention stuff like that
Mm-hmm.
that affect health
Right.
because, like I said, they're not covered,
Mm.
right? You know, like we have like insurance, right? Like you have your lawyer's insurance for errors and omissions. I have seen as a realtor. Home inspectors have the same thing.
Yeah.
So if someone sues them for any reason, oh, like you ruined my deal, or like you didn't
Yeah.
give a good inspection, they have to use their insurance to deal with that.
Yeah.
And if it's anything that outside of the scope of what they're licensed to do, like
Yeah.
and determining mold or gas leaks or something like that, a lot of them won't touch it
Yeah.
because they don't want to have to go through that legal insurance process,
Yeah.
right?
But at that point, if it's mold, you get a mold expert.
Yeah, you gotta. So
Yeah.
the home inspector can say the potential mold
Yeah,
was
yeah, check it out.
detected. Get a certified
Yeah.
person to be sure.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's an extra cost, though, right?
Right.
So to the buyer, but
Sure.
I'm in terms of value to the client, like that's
Yeah.
really like, again, the health of the
Oh
client.
yeah.
I like these inspectors who have that integrity
Right.
to say, look, you're going to be sick in this home if you don't fix it.
Yeah. For
Right.
sure. So what we come down to is home inspectors being involved in these transactions. This is now standard procedure. It's not particularly
It should
optional.
be. Yeah, it should be. And if buyers don't want to do it,
Right.
they need to understand the risks and consequences of it. Right.
Where do the home inspectors come in in relation to the advertised square footage versus actual square footage? Are you finding that they actually take measurements to see what's being
they're not
offered is truly
That's not their job.
no?
No. They want to know generally how big the property is
Yeah.
to get a rough estimate of the amount of work required.
Right.
But they don't care about size.
Yes.
They'll care about, like, they'll ask about how old are the pipes and
Yeah.
when was it built and what's the roof made out of, what kind of heating system is used, those kind of questions.
Right. A little bit earlier in relation to foundations, you mentioned radon.
Yeah.
I've heard of that. I gather it's something you don't want to be involved with.
You don't want to, radon is like, essentially it's a naturally forming gas.
Yeah.
It's more in like rural areas, maybe not so much in concrete
Yes.
Vancouver.
Yeah.
But it can seep into homes like through
Yes.
ventilation, sewers,
Right.
pipes, and it can make you sick. Like,
Right.
like Health Canada reports about 3,000 Canadians die a year from like radon poisoning.
That's serious.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it either, but it's been consistent. So now in realtor, like on the property disclosure statements,
Right.
when you're selling a property, they've recently added those questions for sellers to answer.
Yes.
Are you aware of any radon in your house? Have you
Right.
done a test? What was the result of the test?
Right.
That kind of thing. So as a buyer agent, like we look at that and we have to advise our clients, okay, this home may have radon.
Right.
Like that example I gave, that house in Chilliwack. It was an older house,
Yes.
about an 80-year-old house.
Yes.
It was built on concrete pillars as opposed to like a full
Yeah.
foundation.
Yeah.
meaning that there was some exposure of the soil vapors,
Yes.
potentially even radon, going into the house
Yeah, through the wooden floor.
through the wooden floor, right?
Yeah.
And there was an elderly lady living in that home who had health issues.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, you kind of think, well, could it be? Because
Yeah, seriously. Yeah. Wow.
Like there was, if I can, let me tell you one story the inspector told me, because this really hit home, like about like the gas leak thing. He was doing an inspection of a house in Surrey, and he goes to knock on the door. The seller opens the door. He looks kind of like dazed and confused, and the inspector says, I'm an inspector. Did you know I was coming? He says, oh, okay, yeah, sure, yeah, come on in. The inspector comes on in, and the first thing he notices is like the whole table is filled with the prescription medications.
Mm-hmm.
He's sitting there in the dark and like just seems out of it. So it's not his business, he just kind of like moves along, but he starts looking around, doing the inspection, and very quickly he finds that there is a gas leak in the house.
Yeah.
And he connected it. He saw it was related to an unauthorized suite
Mm.
that had been put in by the owners years back.
Right.
And the person who put the suite in just didn't know what they were doing or cut corners or something, but it resulted in an ineffective gas connection.
Wow.
So there was carbon monoxide leaking at the in the laundry room. Okay. So the home inspector goes to the seller and he says, how you feeling? Like, do you mind if I ask like what these medications are for? And he says, it's for depression, anxiety, things like that. And then he says, so what happened? And he says, well, my wife died about a year ago. This is the seller saying. So the inspector's starting to put, the pieces of the puzzle together.
Yeah.
The daughter's living in the house too.
Mm-hmm.
He starts talking to the daughter and he finds out pretty quick that the mother would always go down to the laundry room, which was in the basement,
Yeah.
right beside where the gas exposure was happening.
Wow.
So she was being hit by the strongest exposure of carbon monoxide over a long period of time.
Oh boy.
So again, like you can't say conclusively,
No.
like legally there's a cause and effect, but I'm just kind of like connect the dots. Like, well, what if they tried to make money by putting in a suite,
Yeah.
but in the process they made a defect in their house,
Right.
created a health hazard.
Yes.
The wife got sick and died, and then the husband gets depressed and is on all his medications from it.
Oh boy.
You know what I mean? So this,
Yeah.
and the inspector was telling me like this is a common thing he sees,
Yeah.
right? It's not a one-off kind of deal, right?
That's true.
So
Or,
those kind of stories, like you imagine, like, and he said he's an inspector where like he's gonna say it's not a healthy home,
yes.
but other inspectors they might not want to touch that because they're like, well, they don't want to be sued, even if they're gonna win.
Yeah.
They still have to pay that $2,500 deductible
Yeah.
for say a $500 home inspection.
Yeah.
So the economics are like, well, what's the point? Why take the risk?
Yeah.
But my inspectors, they have integrity.
For
You
sure.
can't not say something when you know like it's like
For sure.
sick in there, right?
Well, we got a brief moment left. What's
Yeah.
happening in the market? It's April 6th, 2023.
Yeah, April 6th, it's getting better in
Yeah.
some ways. Overall, in a nutshell, you see inventory levels are still low.
Yeah.
Relatively speaking, like in most areas across Vancouver, the Lower Mainland, it's about 20% less inventory than this time last year.
Wow.
So if there was, let's say, 400 homes on the market last year, there'd be like say 300 now.
Yeah.
So you're starting to see an increase in prices in detached homes
Yeah.
because of that. It still hasn't at all come close to last year's prices, but it's definitely picked up since January, February.
Right.
Prices are picking up. Condos and townhouses a little bit different. There's a lot more inventory. It is consistent to last year. Market forces have driven buyers down to that lower price point, like
Yeah.
for under $1 million. So there is more demand there, but there's also more supply. So
Yeah.
the prices haven't gone up as much. But in general, like if you want to, if you're looking for a house, say like in the Vancouver area,
Mm.
anything still around 1.5 million is still going to be, like, because of the low inventory, high demand.
Mm.
We were talking a couple weeks ago about sales ratios, right? How much percentage of each homes are selling each month?
Mm-hmm.
If it's more than 20%, it's a seller's market. So in Vancouver and houses, it's like we're seeing 50%, 60% sales ratios
Yeah.
in that lower price point, around 1.5. Fraser Valley, let's say Surrey, 1.25 million. You're seeing high sales ratio. Maple Ridge, Mission, 1 million. Around that price point, you're seeing a high sales ratio. So that's interesting. Even though interest rates are still high, the market has kind of absorbed that shock, and the money is still coming in, and people are buying again.
All right.
Yeah.
Well done. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much.